The morning sun cast long shadows across the marina in Key Largo, Florida, as Captain Robert Bobby Hernandez secured the final rope on his 32-foot sailboat, the Maria Elena. It was March 15th, 1969, and the weather forecast promised clear skies for his solo journey to Nassau. At 34, Bobby had sailed these waters countless times, his weathered hands and sun-darkened skin testament to 2 decades spent navigating the Atlantic's moods. The boat rocked gently against the dock, her white hull gleaming in the early light, every piece of equipment meticulously maintained and ready for the journey ahead. His wife Carmen watched from the dock, her dark eyes reflecting both pride and the familiar worry that came with loving a man married to the sea. At 29, she'd learned to read the subtle signs in Bobby's preparations. The way he double-checked his navigation equipment, the careful attention he paid to weather reports, the methodical process of stowing provisions and safety gear. Their 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, clutched her mother's hand, waving enthusiastically at her father. "Bring me back a conch shell, Papa," she called out, her voice carrying across the water like a promise he fully intended to keep. Bobby had planned this trip for months, studying charts and weather patterns with the precision that had made him one of the most trusted charter captains in the Florida Keys. The charter business had been slow during the winter season, and he needed to deliver the Maria Elena to Nassau for a wealthy client who'd hired him for a week-long fishing expedition. The route would take him through waters that locals whispered about, the area where compasses spun wildly and where several boats had vanished without explanation over the years. But Bobby Hernandez was a practical man who trusted his instruments more than folklore, his logbooks filled with successful voyages through these same waters. If you're watching this story unfold, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world who share our fascination with these mysterious disappearances. The Maria Elena had been Bobby's pride for 7 years, purchased with savings accumulated from countless fishing charters and weekend sailing lessons. Every inch of her 32 feet had been customized for both comfort and safety, extra fuel tanks for extended range, redundant navigation systems, and emergency equipment that exceeded Coast Guard requirements. Carmen had helped him choose the name, honoring his grandmother who had raised him in Cuba before the family fled to Miami in 1952. The boat represented not just his livelihood, but his connection to the sea that had shaped 3 generations of Hernandez men. As Bobby performed his final safety checks, he thought about the client waiting in Nassau, Harold Richardson, a textile magnate from Atlanta who had specifically requested Bobby's services after hearing about his reputation from other satisfied customers. The week-long charter would provide enough income to carry the family through the slower summer months, when tourists preferred the beaches to deep-sea fishing. Carmen had already started planning improvements to their small house near the marina, including a proper workshop where Bobby could maintain his equipment during the off-season. The departure ritual had become sacred to the Hernandez family over the years. Bobby would kiss Carmen goodbye at exactly 6:30 a.m., lifting Sophia high in the air before setting her down with a promise to return safely. Carmen would hand him a thermos of café con leche and a bag of Cuban sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, enough food to last the journey, plus extra for emergencies. Sophia would present him with a small drawing. Today's featured a sailboat surrounded by dolphins under a smiling sun. These drawings had accumulated in a special box in Bobby's navigation station, talismans of love that had accompanied him on dozens of successful voyages. The morning's routine proceeded exactly as planned. Bobby stowed his provisions, started the engine to warm it while checking all systems, and reviewed his planned route one final time with Carmen. The weather forecast called for light winds and calm seas, perfect conditions for the 20-hour journey to Nassau. His radio crackled with the familiar voices of other fishermen heading out for the day, and the Coast Guard's morning weather update confirmed favorable conditions throughout the Straits of Florida. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Bobby cast off the mooring lines and guided the Maria Elena out of the marina's protective channel. Carmen and Sophia stood on the dock, waving until the boat disappeared beyond the mangrove islands that sheltered Key Largo's harbor. The engine ran smoothly, the compass needle pointed steady and true, and Bobby felt the familiar satisfaction of being alone on the open water with a reliable boat beneath him and clear skies above. As the Florida Keys faded behind him, Bobby settled into the rhythm of ocean sailing that had become second nature over the years. He checked his position every hour, noted wind and weather conditions in his logbook, and maintained regular radio contact with other vessels in the area. The Maria Elena cut cleanly through the moderate swells, her diesel engine purring contentedly as they made steady progress toward the deeper waters of the Straits. Everything about the journey felt routine and familiar, exactly the kind of straightforward delivery run that Bobby had completed successfully dozens of times before. By noon, the boat was making excellent time, the GPS showing they were ahead of schedule for their planned arrival in Nassau the following morning. Bobby allowed himself to relax, enjoying the solitude and the endless expanse of blue water that stretched to every horizon. He thought about Carmen's plans for their house, Sophia's excitement about starting third grade in the fall, and the successful fishing charter that would begin as soon as Harold Richardson stepped aboard in Nassau. Life was good, and the sea was being kind to the Hernandez family once again. The first signs of trouble appeared so gradually that Bobby almost dismissed them as normal variations in his equipment. By 1 p.m. on March 16th, 24 hours into what should have been a routine voyage, the compass needle had begun making small, erratic movements that didn't correspond to any changes in the boat's heading. Bobby tapped the glass cover gently, a habit developed over years of dealing with temperamental marine electronics, but the needle continued its restless dance around the dial. His radio, which had been receiving clear transmissions from other vessels and coastal stations all morning, began filling with static that came and went in unpredictable waves. Conversations that should have been crystal clear at this distance from shore faded in and out like distant shortwave broadcasts from another continent. Bobby adjusted the antenna and checked all connections, finding everything properly secured and functioning normally according to his testing equipment. The sea itself remained deceptively calm, with the same moderate swells and steady breeze that had characterized the voyage since departure. But something indefinable had changed in the quality of the light, a subtle shift in the water's color from the familiar deep blue of the Gulf Stream to an unusual greenish tint that Bobby had never encountered in these waters. The change was so gradual that he couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had begun, but by mid-afternoon it was unmistakable. Bobby consulted his charts repeatedly, calculating and recalculating his position based on dead reckoning and the GPS coordinates that still seemed accurate. According to all his navigation aids, the Maria Elena was precisely where she should be, following the intended course toward Nassau, with only minor deviations caused by current and wind. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong about their location, a sensation that experienced mariners learn to trust even when their instruments suggest otherwise. The radio continued its intermittent function, allowing Bobby to monitor Coast Guard traffic and commercial shipping communications, but his own transmissions seemed to disappear into an electronic void. Ships that should have been able to hear him clearly at this range showed no response to his position reports and routine radio checks. It was as if the Maria Elena existed in a pocket of space where signals could enter but not escape. As afternoon wore into evening, Bobby's concern deepened from mild annoyance to genuine worry. His fuel consumption matched the expected rate for the distance traveled, and all mechanical systems continued functioning normally, but the navigation anomalies were becoming more pronounced with each passing hour. The compass needle now spun in slow, complete circles before settling briefly on headings that bore no relationship to the boat's actual course through the water. Bobby had heard stories throughout his sailing career about unusual phenomena in these waters. Experienced captains who reported similar compass problems, radio interference, and the disorienting sensation of being lost in familiar territory. He had always attributed such tales to navigational errors or equipment failures, the kind of mistakes that proud sailors were reluctant to admit. Now, experiencing these anomalies firsthand, Bobby began to understand how even competent mariners could find themselves in impossible situations. The sunset that evening was unlike anything Bobby had witnessed in 20 years of sailing. The sky took on an unusual copper color that seemed to emanate from the water itself, rather than reflecting the sun's rays. Stars appeared earlier than expected, but their positions seemed wrong somehow, forming patterns that didn't match Bobby's knowledge of celestial navigation. He consulted his nautical almanac repeatedly, trying to reconcile what he observed with what should have been visible at their supposed location and time. By 9 p.m., Bobby made the difficult decision to alter course toward what his instruments indicated was the nearest land. His fuel reserves were adequate for the original voyage to Nassau, but the growing uncertainty about their actual position made it prudent to seek shelter and reassess the situation. The radio occasionally crackled with distant conversations, but his own transmissions continued to meet with silence, as if the Maria Elena had become invisible to the outside world. Sleep came fitfully that night as Bobby dozed in the cockpit, unwilling to trust the autopilot in conditions he didn't understand. Every hour he checked their position, recorded wind and weather observations, and attempted radio contact with anyone who might hear his transmissions. The sea remained calm, but Bobby felt increasingly isolated, cut off from the familiar network of maritime communication that normally provided comfort and safety to solo sailors. When dawn broke on March 17th, Bobby discovered that his situation had worsened considerably overnight. The unusual watercolor had intensified, and islands were visible on the horizon that corresponded to no charts in his navigation library. According to his GPS, they should have been in open ocean, at least 50 miles from the nearest land. The compass had given up any pretense of accuracy, its needle spinning continuously like a child's top. Bobby spent the morning systematically checking every piece of equipment aboard the Maria Elena, searching for rational explanations for the phenomena he was experiencing. The engine ran smoothly, the hull showed no signs of damage, and all safety equipment remained in perfect working order. Only the navigation and communication systems seemed affected by whatever forces were acting on the boat. Despite his growing fear, Bobby maintained meticulous records in his logbook, documenting every anomaly with the precision that had characterized his entire maritime career. The third day began with Bobby anchoring the Maria Elena in the lee of a small island that appeared on no chart he possessed. The water was crystal clear, revealing a sandy bottom studded with coral formations that should not have existed in the deep ocean where his instruments placed them. Tropical fish swam around the boat in species and numbers more typical of a shallow lagoon than the open Atlantic. Every observation reinforced the impossible conclusion that he was somewhere other than where he should be. Bobby had spent the previous evening reviewing every aspect of his navigation, searching for errors that might explain their situation. His calculations were flawless, his equipment had been recently calibrated, and his plotting techniques followed procedures refined over 2 decades of professional sailing. Yet here he was, anchored off an unmapped island in water that looked nothing like the deep blue of the Gulf Stream. The evidence of his senses contradicted everything his training told him should be possible. The morning radio schedule brought fresh frustration as Bobby heard clear transmissions from Coast Guard stations, commercial vessels, and other pleasure craft, all apparently operating normally in familiar waters. His own broadcasts met with the same silence that had characterized the past 48 hours. Several times he heard his own call sign mentioned in Coast Guard traffic, indicating that someone was concerned about his failure to report, but his responses disappeared into the electronic void that seemed to surround the Maria Elena. During his morning inspection of the boat, Bobby discovered the first signs of mechanical trouble. The engine ran rough during startup, requiring several attempts before settling into its normal rhythm. A careful examination revealed nothing obviously wrong with the fuel system, ignition components, or cooling system, but something had changed in the engine's behavior overnight. Bobby added this observation to his growing list of anomalies, wondering if the same forces affecting his navigation equipment were somehow influencing the boat's mechanical systems. The island where he had anchored presented both opportunity and concern. Its beaches looked inviting, offering the chance to stretch his legs and perhaps find fresh water to supplement his supplies. But landing on an uncharted island raised questions about where he actually was and whether he could find his way back to familiar waters. Bobby spent hours studying the island through binoculars, looking for any signs of human habitation or features that might help identify their location. By midday, Bobby made the decision to go ashore, securing the dinghy that he normally used for fishing and loading it with basic supplies and emergency gear. The beach was composed of fine white sand that squeaked under his feet, and the vegetation was lush and tropical, consistent with islands in the Bahamas chain. But the complete absence of any human presence, no buildings, no trash, no signs of previous visitors, suggested a location far from normal shipping routes and tourist destinations. Bobby spent several hours exploring the island, climbing to its highest point in hopes of seeing other land that might help establish their position. The view from the hilltop revealed several other small islands scattered across water that remained the same unusual green color he had first noticed 2 days earlier. None of the visible land masses matched any configuration shown on his charts, and the total absence of boat traffic in every direction reinforced his growing sense of isolation. The afternoon brought new mechanical problems as Bobby attempted to restart the engine for a test run around the island. The starter motor engaged normally, but the engine refused to fire, producing only occasional coughs that suggested fuel or ignition problems. Bobby worked methodically through the troubleshooting procedures he had learned over years of maintaining his own equipment, but every test indicated that the systems should be working properly. Yet the engine remained stubbornly silent. As evening approached, Bobby faced the reality that he might be stranded indefinitely in this strange location. His food and water supplies were adequate for several more days, but the engine problems meant that even if he could determine the correct course home, he might lack the power to make the journey. The radio continued its pattern of receiving clear signals while being unable to transmit, leaving him aware of the outside world but unable to communicate his situation. Bobby spent that night writing extensively in his logbook, documenting every detail of his experience with scientific precision. If something happened to him, he wanted to leave a complete record for anyone who might eventually discover the Maria Elena. His entries described the navigation anomalies, the mechanical failures, and the impossible islands where he found himself anchored. Most importantly, he wrote about his family, recording messages for Carmen and Sophia that expressed his love and his determination to return to them. The fourth day brought a breakthrough in Bobby's understanding of his situation, though not the kind he had hoped for. While examining the engine's fuel system for the third time, he discovered water contamination in the diesel tank. The fuel, which had been clean and fresh when he departed Key Largo, now showed signs of contamination that could only have developed over weeks or months of storage. Yet he had been at sea for only 4 days, and the fuel had been purchased from a reputable marina just before departure. This discovery forced Bobby to confront the possibility that his experience of time might be as distorted as his navigation. If the fuel contamination was real, and if his other observations were accurate, then perhaps the days he thought he had been at sea were actually much longer periods compressed in his memory. The idea was terrifying in its implications, but it provided the first coherent explanation for the multiple anomalies he had encountered. Bobby spent the day attempting every possible repair to the fuel system, using emergency supplies and improvised techniques to clean the contaminated diesel. His efforts met with partial success, allowing the engine to run for brief periods, but not reliably enough for extended navigation. Each test run reinforced his conclusion that the Maria Elena was slowly dying, her systems failing in ways that defied logical explanation but followed a pattern of gradual deterioration. By the 5th day, Bobby had accepted that he was fighting for survival rather than simply trying to return home on schedule. The engine problems had worsened overnight, and a careful inspection revealed stress cracks in the hull near the keel that had definitely not been present when he left Key Largo. Water was entering the boat faster than the bilge pump could remove it, requiring constant monitoring and manual pumping to keep the Maria Elena afloat. The radio situation had also deteriorated, with incoming signals becoming weaker and more intermittent, while his own transmission capability remained non-existent. Bobby could still occasionally hear Coast Guard communications and commercial shipping traffic, but the conversations seemed to come from an increasingly distant world that had little connection to his current reality. He maintained his listening schedule religiously, hoping to hear some mention of search efforts or other information that might help him understand his situation. Bobby's systematic approach to emergency situations, developed through years of professional sailing, served him well as he prioritized his remaining resources and options. Fresh water was becoming a concern, though he had been able to collect some rainwater during a brief shower the previous evening. Food supplies remained adequate for several more days if he rationed carefully. The most pressing issue was the hull damage, which seemed to be worsening despite his attempts at temporary repairs. During his morning inspection of the boat, Bobby made a disturbing discovery that changed everything. While examining the hull cracks more closely, he found marine growth, barnacles and seaweed, attached to areas that should have been completely clean after only 5 days at sea. The growth patterns suggested weeks or months of immersion, which was impossible based on his experience of time since leaving Key Largo. Yet the evidence was undeniable, forcing Bobby to confront the possibility that his perception of time had been somehow altered. This revelation led Bobby to examine other aspects of his situation more carefully. His beard, which should have shown only a few days' growth, seemed longer and more unkempt than expected. His logbook entries, when he reviewed them chronologically, revealed subtle changes in his handwriting that might indicate a longer period of stress and isolation than he consciously remembered. Most disturbing of all, his memories of the voyage seemed to contain gaps and inconsistencies that he had previously attributed to fatigue and worry. Bobby spent hours that day attempting to reconcile his subjective experience of time with the physical evidence accumulating around him. If weeks or months had actually passed since his departure from Key Largo, then Carmen and Sophia would be facing far more than the worry of a delayed arrival. They would be dealing with the uncertainty of a missing husband and father, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. The thought of their suffering was more painful than his own physical discomfort and mechanical problems. As the day progressed, Bobby's efforts to repair the hull damage met with limited success. The cracks continued to spread despite his patches, and the rate of water entry increased steadily throughout the afternoon. By evening, he was pumping the bilge every 30 minutes to keep the boat from settling lower in the water. The Maria Elena was slowly sinking, and Bobby lacked the materials and tools necessary for permanent repairs. That night, Bobby made the most difficult decision of his maritime career. Rather than continue fighting a losing battle against the hull damage, he would prepare his emergency equipment and documentation for survival after the boat sank. His logbook, personal papers, and emergency supplies would be sealed in waterproof containers and attached to the life raft. If the Maria Elena was destined to join the dozens of other vessels that had vanished in these waters, at least some record of what had happened might eventually reach his family. Bobby worked through the night by flashlight, methodically preparing for the worst, while hoping for a miracle that would save his beloved boat. He wrote final letters to Carmen and Sophia, expressing his love and his regret at leaving them. He compiled a detailed report of all the anomalies he had experienced, hoping that future investigators might find clues to prevent similar disappearances. Most importantly, he prepared the waterproof emergency container that would carry his words home if his body could not make the journey. The sixth morning brought the realization that this would likely be his last day aboard the Maria Elena. Water was entering the hull faster than he could remove it, and the boat was noticeably lower in the water than it had been at sunset. The engine, even if he could repair it, would not provide enough power to overcome the drag of the flooding hull. Bobby faced the prospect of abandoning ship in waters that seemed to exist outside the normal world, with no certainty that rescue would ever come. Bobby spent his final hours aboard the Maria Elena in careful preparation and quiet reflection. He tested all his emergency equipment, reviewed his survival procedures, and made peace with the decisions that had brought him to this point. He thought about Carmen's smile, Sophia's laughter, and the life they had built together in Key Largo. Most of all, he held on to the hope that somehow, someday, his words would find their way home to the people he loved more than the sea itself. On a humid Tuesday morning in July 1997, 28 years after Bobby Hernandez had vanished, a group of marine biology students from the University of Miami were conducting research near Andros Island in the Bahamas. Dr. Sarah Chen, their professor, had organized the expedition to study coral reef systems, but the ocean had different plans for their discovery. The research vessel Cousteau's Dream rocked gently in the moderate swells as graduate students prepared their diving equipment for another day of underwater observation and sample collection. Roberto Martinez, a graduate student specializing in oceanography, was using underwater metal detectors to map debris patterns on the ocean floor when his equipment began registering strong signals about 40 feet down. The area was known for shipwrecks dating back centuries, but something about these readings felt different. The signals were too concentrated, too recent to be colonial-era artifacts, and they appeared to be emanating from a single source rather than the scattered debris typical of ancient wrecks. Dr. Chen examined the sonar readings with growing interest. Her team had been studying this particular section of reef for 3 days, documenting the recovery patterns following recent hurricane damage. The metal detector readings represented an unexpected discovery that could provide valuable information about modern marine debris and its impact on coral ecosystems. After consulting with the boat's captain about safety protocols and weather conditions, she authorized a diving expedition to investigate the source of the signals. After obtaining proper permits from Bahamian authorities through their research liaison in Nassau, the team organized a careful diving expedition to investigate the anomalous readings. The water was crystal clear that morning, visibility extending nearly 80 feet in every direction, with only a gentle current running parallel to the reef formation. Conditions were ideal for underwater archaeology, and Dr. Chen assigned her two most experienced divers to the initial investigation. Roberto Martinez and his diving partner Lisa Park descended slowly through the warm water, following the metal detector's increasingly strong signals toward the sandy bottom. The reef structure around them was typical of the Bahamas' coral formations, with vibrant marine life indicating a healthy ecosystem undisturbed by recent human activity. As they approached the 40-foot depth indicated by their equipment, they could see the outline of something man-made resting on the sandy bottom among scattered coral heads. What they found defied their initial expectations of modern debris or historical artifacts. Partially buried in the sand was a waterproof container, its metal surface corroded by nearly 3 decades of saltwater exposure but still structurally intact. Marine growth covered most of its surface, the kind of barnacle and coral encrustation that develops over many years of immersion. Lisa carefully excavated the container, while Roberto documented their find with an underwater camera, taking photographs from multiple angles to record its position and condition. The container itself was a standard marine emergency storage box, the type used by professional sailors and charter captains to protect important documents and emergency supplies. Its design suggested manufacture in the 1960s or early 1970s, based on the heavy construction and simple latching mechanism that characterized marine equipment from that era. Despite its age and exposure to salt water, the container's waterproof seals appeared to have functioned properly, protecting whatever lay inside from decades of ocean exposure. Back on the research vessel, Dr. Chen supervised the delicate process of opening the container. Her team documented each step with digital photography, understanding that whatever they had discovered might have historical or legal significance. The container's exterior showed clear evidence of long-term immersion, but the internal compartments remained dry and intact. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and sealed with maritime wax, they discovered a collection of documents and personal effects. The first item to emerge was a ship's logbook, its leather cover water-stained but readable despite nearly 30 years of submersion. The preservation was remarkable, testament to the container's waterproof design and the careful packing techniques of whoever had prepared it for ocean survival. Stamped on the front in fading gold letters were the words, S.V. Maria Elena, R. Hernandez, Master. Dr. Chen immediately recognized the significance of their discovery and ordered a halt to further examination until proper authorities could be notified. The team immediately contacted the Coast Guard through their research vessel's radio, reporting the discovery of what appeared to be evidence from a missing vessel. Lieutenant Commander Williams, the duty officer at the Miami Coast Guard station, took detailed notes about the find and requested GPS coordinates for the discovery location. Within hours, Coast Guard investigators were consulting their files for any record of a vessel named Maria Elena, with a master named R. Hernandez. The official records revealed a case that had puzzled investigators for nearly 3 decades. Robert Bobby Hernandez, age 34, had departed Key Largo on March 15, 1969, bound for Nassau in his 32-foot sailboat Maria Elena. He had failed to arrive at his destination, and despite an extensive search operation, no trace of the man or his vessel had ever been found. The case remained open in Coast Guard files as one of dozens of unexplained disappearances in the region during the 1960s and 1970s. Lieutenant Commander Williams personally called Carmen Hernandez, now 73 years old and still living in the same house near the Key Largo marina where she had waited for Bobby's return. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while she was reviewing charter schedules in the office that still served as a memorial to her husband. "Mrs. Hernandez," Williams said carefully, "This is Lieutenant Commander Williams with the Coast Guard. We believe we've found something that belonged to your husband." Carmen's hands trembled as she listened to the explanation of the discovery near Andros Island. A logbook. Bobby's logbook. After 28 years of silence, questions, and gradual acceptance of uncertainty, the ocean was finally ready to speak. She immediately called her daughter Sophia in Orlando, her voice breaking as she shared the news that would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted their family for nearly 3 decades. Sophia and her husband Michael drove down from Orlando immediately, arriving at the Coast Guard station in Miami as the sun set over Biscayne Bay. The logbook had been transferred to a document preservation specialist who would carefully separate the pages and photograph each entry before salt damage could worsen. The process would take several days, but preliminary examination had already revealed entries written in Bobby's distinctive handwriting, documenting the final voyage of the Maria Elena. Dr. Chen's research team worked closely with Coast Guard investigators and maritime historians to verify the authenticity of the logbook and analyze the circumstances of its preservation and discovery. The location where Roberto Martinez had found the container corresponded closely to coordinates mentioned in preliminary examination of Bobby's final entries, suggesting that his emergency preparations had functioned exactly as designed, carrying his final words through nearly 3 decades of ocean currents to their eventual discovery. The preservation specialists worked with painstaking care to separate the logbook's pages and document each entry. Bobby's handwriting, still familiar to Carmen after all these years, recorded a progression from routine navigation notes to increasingly desperate observations of phenomena that defied explanation. Each page revealed another piece of the puzzle that had tormented the Hernandez family since that March morning in 1969, when Bobby had sailed away from Key Largo's marina for the last time. Carmen, Sophia, and Michael spent hours at the Coast Guard facility, watching as experts carefully revealed the contents of Bobby's final logbook. Each entry brought them closer to understanding what had happened during those final days aboard the Maria Elena, but also raised new questions about the nature of the region where so many vessels had vanished without explanation. For the first time in 28 years, they would hear Bobby's voice again, preserved in the precise handwriting that had documented hundreds of successful voyages before recording the mystery of his final journey. The discovery attracted immediate attention from maritime historians, oceanographers, and journalists specializing in unexplained disappearances. Dr. Chen found herself coordinating with researchers from multiple institutions who wanted to study both the logbook's contents and the unusual preservation conditions that had protected it for nearly 3 decades. The Maria Elena case was about to become one of the best documented examples of the mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the region between Florida and the Bahamas. As word of the discovery spread through maritime communities, other families who had lost loved ones in similar circumstances came forward with their own stories. The Hernandez case was no longer an isolated mystery, but part of a larger pattern that had affected dozens of vessels and hundreds of people over several decades. Bobby's logbook would provide the first detailed first-hand account of what sailors experienced when their vessels encountered the anomalous conditions that seemed to plague certain areas of the Western Atlantic. For Carmen and Sophia, the discovery meant something far more personal than scientific revelation or historical documentation. After 28 years of wondering, hoping, and gradually accepting the uncertainty of Bobby's fate, they were finally going to learn what had happened to the husband and father who had sailed away on what should have been a routine charter delivery. Bobby's voice would speak to them again from the pages of the logbook that had waited nearly 3 decades to tell its story. The first entries revealed in Bobby's final logbook were routine navigational notes that brought tears to Carmen's eyes. His handwriting, still familiar after all these years, recorded weather conditions, compass headings, and radio check-ins with the methodical precision that had characterized his entire maritime career. March 16, 1969, 10:30 a.m., left Key Largo on schedule. Seas calm, wind from the southeast at 8 knots. Carmen packed enough sandwiches to feed the entire Coast Guard. Miss her and Sophia already. But as the preservation specialists carefully separated more pages, the tone of Bobby's entries began to change dramatically. March 16, 1969, 1:15 p.m. Something strange happening with the compass. Needle spinning like it can't find magnetic north. Radio full of static. Weather still clear, but there's electricity in the air. Carmen gripped Sophia's hand as they read these words, finally understanding that Bobby had encountered something beyond normal maritime hazards. The entries continued with increasing urgency as Bobby documented multiple navigation instruments failing simultaneously. His GPS unit, relatively new technology in 1969, showed impossible coordinates. His radio could receive signals, but transmission seemed limited to brief windows of clarity. March 16, 1969, 4:45 p.m. This doesn't make sense. According to the sun's position, I should be approaching Nassau waters, but I can see the Florida coast to the west. Either I'm completely turned around, or something's wrong with my calculations. The watercolor has changed from deep blue to an unusual green. Dr. Chen worked with maritime historians to verify the authenticity of every detail in the logbook. The ink composition, paper type, and Bobby's handwriting all matched samples from his earlier logs that Carmen had preserved in their home office. Weather records from March 1969 confirmed the conditions he'd described during his departure from Key Largo. Most remarkably, the coordinates he'd recorded in his entries placed the Maria Elena in waters near Andros Island, exactly where Roberto Martinez had discovered the waterproof container. As more pages were revealed, the mystery deepened beyond anything the family had imagined. Bobby's entries became increasingly desperate as he realized he was genuinely lost, not just temporarily disoriented. His compass continued to spin wildly, and his radio equipment allowed only intermittent contact with the outside world. March 17, 1969, 6 a.m. Anchored near a small quay that's not on my charts. Slept in shifts, checking instruments every hour. Nothing makes sense. The stars were wrong last night, constellations I didn't recognize. Going to try to reach Nassau harbor on dead reckoning. The scientific implications of Bobby's observations fascinated Dr. Chen and her colleagues. His descriptions of magnetic anomalies, radio interference, and navigational confusion matched reports from other vessels that had disappeared in the same region over the decades. Maritime experts studied his detailed recordings, noting that his compass problems and electronic interference corresponded to documented phenomena in the Western Atlantic that scientists still couldn't fully explain. Sophia found herself reading her father's words with a mixture of grief and pride. Even in his most desperate moments, Bobby had maintained his professional discipline, documenting everything he observed with scientific precision. March 17, 1969, 11:30 a.m. Engine died completely. No response when I tried to restart. Checked fuel lines, spark plugs, everything I can think of. Radio working better now. Can hear Coast Guard traffic, but they can't seem to hear me when I transmit. The final entries revealed Bobby's realization that he was in mortal danger, but also his unwavering determination to ensure his family would someday learn what had happened to him. Rather than succumb to panic, he had methodically prepared his emergency equipment and documentation, creating the very record that now provided answers to questions that had tormented the Hernandez family for 28 years. March 17th, 1969, 3:15 p.m. Water rising in the bilge, faster than the pump can handle. Found a crack in the hull near the keel. Must have hit something I couldn't see in this strange water. Going to try to patch it, but I need to prepare for the worst. If someone finds this log, tell Carmen and Sophia I love them more than the sea itself. Carmen wept openly as these words were read aloud by the document preservation specialist. After decades of wondering whether Bobby had suffered, whether he had thought of them in his final moments, she finally had her answers. His love for his family had dominated his thoughts, even as he faced the prospect of dying alone in mysterious waters far from home. March 17th, 1969, 6:45 p.m. Patch is holding but barely, moving everything important to the waterproof emergency container. Charts, identification papers, this logbook. Going to attach it to the life raft and hope the current carries it towards shipping lanes. The Maria Elena has been good to me, but she's dying. Time to trust the ocean to carry my words home. The final entry was written in a different handwriting, shakier, clearly composed under extreme stress as Bobby prepared to abandon his beloved boat. March 17th, 1969, 9:20 p.m. Water coming in too fast now. Container sealed and attached to emergency beacon. Carmen, mi amor, you gave me the best years of my life. Sophia, my little fish, learned to swim in calm waters. The sea is beautiful, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Tell everyone I tried to come home. Bobby? The Coast Guard reopened Bobby's case based on the new evidence, conducting a thorough investigation that lasted several months. Their analysis concluded that the Maria Elena had likely suffered structural damage after being driven off course by a combination of unusual magnetic conditions and severe weather that hadn't been detected by regional forecasting systems in 1969. The official report acknowledged the limitations of 1960s technology, while noting that similar phenomena continued to affect vessels in the region, even with modern navigation equipment. For Carmen, the logbook provided something more valuable than official explanations or scientific theories. It gave her Bobby's voice again after 28 years of silence. His love for his family resonated from every page, even in his darkest moments. She learned that he had thought of them constantly during his final ordeal, and that his primary concern hadn't been his own survival, but rather ensuring his family would know what had happened to him. Sophia found profound comfort in reading her father's descriptions of their last morning together. He had written about her excited wave from the dock and her request for a conch shell, details that proved how much those final moments had meant to him. The logbook revealed a side of her father she had been too young to fully appreciate. His professionalism, his love for the sea, and his unwavering dedication to returning safely to his family. The discovery attracted widespread media attention and renewed scientific interest in the mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the region between Florida and the Bahamas. Dr. Chen's research team analyzed water samples and magnetic readings from the area where they had found the logbook, discovering unusual mineral deposits on the ocean floor and documenting magnetic anomalies that could indeed interfere with compass readings and radio communications. Carmen decided to donate Bobby's logbook to the Maritime Heritage Museum in Key Largo, where it would be preserved and displayed as part of an educational exhibit honoring sailors lost at sea. The museum created a comprehensive display about navigation safety and the mysterious phenomena that had claimed dozens of vessels in the region over the decades. Bobby's story became a catalyst for improved safety protocols and emergency communication systems for solo sailors. Several other families came forward after learning about the Logbook's discovery, sharing similar stories of loved ones who had vanished in the same area under comparable circumstances. The Coast Guard used Bobby's detailed observations as training material, showing how even experienced mariners could find themselves in impossible situations due to equipment failures and environmental anomalies that science couldn't yet fully explain. Carmen lived for 6 more years after the Logbook's discovery, finally at peace with her husband's fate. She continued operating the charter business with help from Michael, who had developed his own love for the water despite the tragedy that had shaped his wife's childhood. When Carmen passed away in 2003, Sophia found among her mother's possessions a letter addressed to Bobby, written but never sent, in which she had forgiven him for the sailing trip that took him away and thanked him for the years of love and adventure they had shared. Today, Sophia continues operating the family charter business with her son Roberto, who inherited his grandfather's passion for the sea, along with his name. The Maria Elena II, a new boat purchased to honor Bobby's memory, takes passengers on educational tours that include stops at the museum where his logbook is displayed. Roberto often tells customers about his grandfather's final voyage, emphasizing both the beauty and the unpredictable dangers of the waters they explore together. The mystery of what exactly happened to Bobby Hernandez may never be completely solved, but his logbook ensured that his final chapter would eventually be written. 28 years after vanishing into the deep blue waters between Florida and the Bahamas, his words had found their way home, carrying with them a message of love that proved stronger than the sea that claimed him. His legacy lived on, not just in the scientific understanding his observations provided, but in the knowledge that he had never stopped fighting to return to the family he loved more than life itself. The logbook's discovery provided closure for the Hernandez family, while opening new questions for maritime researchers and safety experts. Bobby's detailed documentation of the phenomena he encountered became part of a growing database of similar reports from the region, contributing to ongoing efforts to understand and predict the conditions that had claimed so many vessels over the decades. His final gift to his family became his lasting contribution to the safety of future sailors who would follow the same routes through waters that remained as beautiful and mysterious as they had been on that March morning in 1969 when he sailed away from Key Largo for the last time.